My name is Melanie Sue Hicks, and I am part of the AJS Consulting Group team. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the actual words involved in grant writing. So let's start with a little visual aid. All right, so we're going to talk when words matter, writing a compelling grant story. This is a little bit about me. I am a workforce and HR expert with a SHRM certification. I am a certified fundraising executive. I've done more than 25 years of grant writing. And I started my career in local government and in education policy. I actually have a PhD in public policy. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what local governments think about in terms of grants, as well as what education institutions. I went on to be an assistant provost and a corporate consultant, and then a nonprofit CEO, chief programs officer, and a consultant. I've also written a few books, and I own a publishing house as well as a TEDx speaker. And so my connection with words goes in and out of the grant writing environment. And I think that gives it a lens that makes me very unique. So there are three parts to a grant, obviously: the required info, the compelling story, and the data and statistics. All of these are important components to get just right in order to craft a winning grant. But the compelling story can sometimes make or break you if you're in a pile of a number of other really competitive grants. A board reviewer is one that does not finish your grant, that gives it more of a negative score, or that just moves on to the next one. Trust me when I say I have been also a grant reviewer for both federal, state, and local grants. And if I'm bored, I am moving on to the next and looking for a more interesting story. The second thing to note is, how well do you know your audience? The audience of who is reading your grant is critically important. Here's why. There are three main things that, as humans, that make us connect with our audiences. And the first is neural coupling. Neural coupling is sharing your own experiences that activates the mirror neurons in a listener's brain. And it puts your brain in a state of coherence and allows your insights to become their own. It's the lean-in effect. It is where a reviewer might say, oh, I'm really tied to this organization because I'm tied to their story. Dopamine creates enjoyable moments and conversations during presentations. And so during any kind of presentation of language, even in a written form like grants. And so it's important to spark a reviewer's dopamine. And then oxytocin. This is what invokes empathy, connection, trust. This is what will make a reviewer say, okay, I believe this organization is worthy of our money because I feel the empathy of their constituents and I trust them. It's our job to really use these skills to ignite all of those reactions and all of those neuron firings in our reviewers' brains. And that is how you end up with a winning grant proposal. So here's some writing tips. It's a spinoff of a 1936 Dale Carnegie book, but it was written by an author named Lopez Forbes, rather. And it's just kind of a guideline. You want to search for shared experiences. How do you get the reviewers to understand what your constituents are going through? Next, you want to understand the values and intentions, not just of yourself, but also of the reviewer. What are they trying to fund? What is their mission in who they're trying to reach out to? You want to lead with your head and heart. This is about honesty. This is about integrity, making sure that what you're putting on paper is not only the truth, but also the heartfelt truth. You want to get your hands dirty. This is about really getting into the details of a story to really understand what needs to be said, and then increasing engagement. These are all the tips for engaging an audience in great writing. Now, I want to play a little game. We've talked a little bit about audience, and one of the most important things to know is the research that you need to do as not a grant writer if you're a client, but as the organization. You should know who you're applying to, who is actually reading those grants. So can you max the audience with the right kind of story? So It's a corporate foundation, and the reviewers are the national venture capitalists and C-suite officers. They most likely want to see focus on impact stats and aspirational mentions of broad sweeping transformation. If it's government funding, where reviewers are longtime civil servants, uh, you most likely want to talk about um, multiple individuals that represent the various residents in the local areas, right? You want to connect yourself to the city and the civil servants that live in that area. If it is a family foundation where children of the original founders actually make the selection, you might want to focus on a single constituent and the full life change that took place, right? The most heartfelt story. And if you're the United Way or a collaborative pot of money and reviewers are community leaders or nonprofit board members, you want to look at partnerships and what working together. Framing your grant proposal, not just around the questions, but also around who the reviewers are and what their motivation is, will really help to sell your story. There's an exercise that I do called the 3 levels of writing, and I believe it's really important that we exercise all 3 in every kind of writing, whether that is novels, nonfiction, or grants. The first level of writing is the most shallow level. It is the questions where you just need to get the basic information. Who are your funders and what did they fund you for? Not the big story, just the amounts and the names and whether it's restricted or not, right? Level 2 is where you're beginning to tell the overall story of the organization. You want a little heart in there, but you don't want to belabor the point, right? And level 3 is the deep level of detail. This is where you use examples to really give the reader a feel for what your constituents are going through and why your work is so valuable and impactful. I like to say for grants, it is a little bit of a 2.5. We want to stay enough in depth that we make ourselves stand out against other grant writers, but we also don't want to be so far in depth that we're not getting to some of the critical pieces of information. So here is a couple of tips. You want to start at the point of the rupture. It is great if you can find a way in the general narrative to really tell a story. Start where the pain points are. What are your constituents feeling that really compels you to need to run your nonprofit in order to help serve them? You want to spoon feed but compel. So in other words, you want to give them enough detail, but not so bogged down in detail that you get away from the important points of what is your action? How are you going to implement that? What are some of the challenges, right? Give them all of the information they need, but also compel them with in an interesting way. Give them level 3, but connect back to level 2. So in other words, when you're telling a story, it's great, but you can't leave it as just a dangling, which brings me to the next one, no danglers. You can't just leave a story out there without connecting the dots for them. Really connect the dots as to why that story directly connects to the money that you are asking for. Not just money in general for your organization, but the specific story for this specific grant in this specific use of dollars that you're asking for. Before I go on, here is a little interlude I don't have a slide for, which is talking about AI. And if you go back to some of the earlier AJS videos, you'll see an entire discussion with Audrey and Peter on our team who discuss in detail the use, the tricks and trades and the positives and negatives of using AI as it relates to grant writing. But here's what I have to say. AI is a tool, but it does not represent your voice. And so when I talk about these stories, as a editor and a writer, I can immediately pick up AI. Not everyone can, and that's okay. But AI is very lyrical in nature. It tends to add a lot of words that don't matter. That's not the same as level 3. Level 3 is details with a purpose, not lyrical language and repeating phrases, uses of the M dash. All of these things are telltales of AI that actually diminish the story you're trying to tell because it doesn't feel real. I know there's a temptation to want to plug and play into AI every question in a grant, but trust me when I say, without these human elements added to it, it will sound like robotic and generic, and reviewers can spot it. Trust me when I say reviewers can spot it a mile away, and it will diminish your impact and your ability to win grants. If you want some great writing tips, I cannot recommend these books more. Aunt Lamont has a wonderful collection of books, but Bird by Bird is probably the most impactful book. The Story of the Tonsillectomy is probably my favorite book of all, or my favorite section of that book. But that book in general is just a wonderful source for really honing the craft of writing, even if it's just in these little smidgets for grant writing. You can take something from that book. And then Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way, is a classic. It just celebrated its 25th anniversary, and it's ways to connect creativity and overcome really your self-doubt in writing. So if part of what you're doing using AI or just shying away from grant writing in general was because you have self-doubt, this is a really great book to bolden your skills. So now it's your turn. How can you take these quick tips and turn them into your grant story? Part of grant writing is really understanding who you are and how you can connect with various audiences. So I implore you to take those tips, flip back to that slide where we talk about the different potential audiences that you're writing for, and think about writing some general narrative for each of those audiences. And then you can just sort of use that in grants, and it makes the grant writing process quicker because you have these standard narratives. They're ready to go, and they only need to be tweaked a little bit at a time. So you can spend time not under deadline preparing for what you will use when you are under deadline. I'd be happy to connect and talk more about any of the things we talked about today as it relates to grant writing or writing in general. You can find me on LinkedIn at Melanie Sue Hicks, PhD. You can find any of my social media or websites at my Linktree. Just go to Linktree, Melanie Sue Hicks. You can email me at ajsconsultinggroup.com or feel free to call or text me. I am always available to talk, and I just love it. So thank you so much for your time, and have a great day. Go win some money.